2 hours ago, a joint CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency flash assessment reached the desks of the National Security Council's senior directors with a classification level that has not been used for a Persian Gulf-related document since the 2003 Iraq weapons of mass destruction search. The assessment's subject line contains 4 words that have produced what one senior official described as the most uncomfortable silence of the entire conflict. Funds unaccounted. Materials unsecured. The body of the assessment documents what American intelligence has been able to confirm, what it suspects, and, most alarmingly, what it simply does not know about the disposition of approximately $700 million that moved out of traceable Revolutionary Guard financial infrastructure in the 72 hours immediately following Khamenei's elimination, and the nuclear and advanced weapons materials that were co-located with the financial infrastructure that disappeared alongside the money. $700 million. Gone. The people who moved it, gone into the fractured power structure of a decapitated state. The materials that may have traveled with it, unaccounted for in a country where American strike packages destroyed the centralized command architecture that was supposed to be monitoring their location. Washington does not know where the money went. Washington does not know where the materials went. And Washington, for the first time in this conflict, is confronting the possibility that it may never fully know. This is the dimension of epic fury's aftermath that the administration's victory narrative has been structurally unable to address, because addressing it requires acknowledging something that the public framing of the operation has been carefully designed to avoid. Destroying a regime's command structure and destroying a regime's distributed capabilities are 2 entirely different military objectives. Epic fury achieved the first with historic precision. The second objective, the one that actually determines whether the conflict produces lasting security rather than lasting instability, was never fully within the operation's reach, and the $700 million disappearance is the most visible evidence of that gap. To understand what the missing funds represent and why their disappearance is generating CIA-level alarm rather than Pentagon-level concern, you have to understand what the Revolutionary Guard's financial infrastructure actually was. It was not a conventional military budget managed through a finance ministry. It was a parallel economic system built over 4 decades that operated simultaneously as a warfighting fund, a sanctions evasion mechanism, a patronage network for maintaining factional loyalty, and a strategic reserve for exactly the kind of existential crisis that epic fury represented. The $700 million that disappeared is not the entirety of that system. It is the portion that was liquid, mobile, and co-located with command infrastructure in ways that allowed it to be moved quickly when the strikes began. The people who moved it were not acting on improvised instinct. They were executing a contingency protocol that the Revolutionary Guard had been developing and refining since at least the 2019 maximum pressure campaign made clear that American military action was a genuine near-term possibility. The money did not disappear. It was evacuated. The difference matters enormously because evacuation implies a destination, a purpose, and a set of recipients who are now funded and operational in ways that American intelligence cannot fully map. But this is where it gets serious, because the money trail, as alarming as it is not the primary driver of the CIA assessment's classification level. The primary driver is what moved with the money. American pre-strike intelligence identified 17 locations across Iran where enriched uranium stockpiles, advanced centrifuge components, and weapons-adjacent technical materials were co-located with Revolutionary Guard financial and command infrastructure. Epic Fury's strike packages destroyed 11 of those 17 locations. 6 were not struck, either because real-time battle damage assessment indicated the materials had already been moved before the strikes arrived, or because the targeting architecture prioritized command and communications nodes over material storage sites in the opening strike sequence. Of those 6 unconfirmed locations, American intelligence has subsequently been able to account for the materials at 4 through a combination of signals intelligence, human intelligence reporting, and overhead imagery analysis. The materials at 2 locations remain unaccounted for, not destroyed, not secured, not transferred to any custody that American intelligence can identify, simply not located. In a country with a fractured governing structure, 3 competing factions, $700 million in mobile funding, and a radical continuity group whose stated strategic objective is the continuation of asymmetric operations against American and Israeli interests, 2 unaccounted locations containing weapons-adjacent nuclear materials is not a bureaucratic loose end. It is a potential catastrophe in its earliest and most preventable stage. The financial trail that intelligence analysts have been able to partially reconstruct tells a story that is, in some ways, more alarming than the complete absence of a trail would be. Portions of the $700 million have moved through a network of financial intermediaries that American Treasury analysts recognize from previous sanctions evasion cases involving the Revolutionary Guard's External Operations Directorate, shell companies in the UAE, Iraq, and Turkey, cryptocurrency transactions routed through mixing services that obscure the origin and destination of transfers, physical cash movements through border crossings in eastern Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan that American intelligence monitors but cannot interdict without cooperation from local governments that have their own complex relationships with the networks involved. The fact that the money is moving through known channels rather than entirely new ones suggests that the radical continuity faction, which intelligence analysts assess as the most likely controller of the evacuated funds, is not improvising. It is activating infrastructure that was built, maintained, and kept dormant for exactly this scenario. A network designed to function after the regime's formal structure collapsed. A financial circulatory system that operates independently of any state authority, funded, operational, and pursuing objectives that have not changed simply because the centralized command that originally authorized them no longer exists. And what happened next is the dimension of this crisis that connects the financial disappearance to the nuclear materials question in ways that the administration has not yet been able to speak about publicly. The radical continuity faction's leadership, according to human intelligence reporting that American analysts assess as highly credible, has been in contact with at least 2 non-state actors with demonstrated interest in acquiring weapons-grade nuclear materials or the technical expertise to produce them. The identities of those actors are classified, their geographic locations span 2 continents. The nature of the contact, whether it represents exploratory inquiry, active negotiation, or a transaction already in progress, is not confirmed. What is confirmed is that the contact exists, that it postdates Khamenei's elimination, and that the Revolutionary Guard commanders involved in those contacts are among the individuals assessed as having operational knowledge of the 2 unaccounted materials locations. This is the scenario that nuclear proliferation analysts have been warning about for decades. Not a state-sponsored nuclear weapons program that can be targeted, negotiated with, or deterred through conventional means. A post-state dispersal of nuclear materials and nuclear expertise into non-state networks that operate without addresses, without accountable leadership, and without the rational deterrence calculus that makes state-sponsored nuclear threats manageable. Epic fury destroyed the Islamic Republic's centralized nuclear program. It may have created the conditions for something considerably harder to find and considerably harder to stop. Trump's political and strategic exposure on the missing funds and materials question is unlike any he has faced in this conflict, because it cannot be addressed through the victory narrative framework that has been managing every other dimension of the public story. He cannot claim the materials are secured without the intelligence assessment confirming it, and the intelligence assessment does not confirm it. He cannot publicly acknowledge the 2 unaccounted locations without triggering a level of public alarm that would dominate every other political conversation in the country. He cannot order a ground-based search and seizure operation in the relevant areas of Iran without deploying American forces into a country where no governing authority has invited them and where 3 competing factions, 2 of which are hostile to American presence, control overlapping territorial claims. And he cannot task allied intelligence services with the search without sharing the specific intelligence about what is missing and where it was last located, which would require disclosing the gaps in American pre-strike intelligence that allowed the materials to remain at unconfirmed locations in the first place. The international proliferation community's reaction to the emerging picture has been one of controlled but urgent alarm. The International Atomic Energy Agency has formally requested from the American government a complete accounting of Iran's nuclear materials inventory as of the pre-strike date and a status report on any materials that cannot be confirmed as destroyed or secured. The American government has not responded to that request with the specificity the IAEA is seeking, which the agency's director has described in private communications to member state governments as deeply concerning. European non-proliferation experts have begun publicly discussing the possibility that Epic Fury has created a proliferation scenario more dangerous than the one it was designed to eliminate, not because the assessment is confirmed, but because the absence of confirmation is itself a form of evidence that the situation is not under control. The silence from Washington on the materials question is being read by every government with the technical expertise to understand what the silence means, as an admission that the answer to the IAEA's request is not one the administration is prepared to give. The $700 million has a second strategic function beyond funding the radical continuity faction's immediate operational needs that the financial intelligence picture is beginning to clarify. Portions of the evacuated funds appear to be flowing into the proxy network activation that is sustaining Hezbollah's saturation campaign against Israel's northern border, the Houthi maritime disruption operations in the Red Sea approaches, and the IRGC-linked militia activity in Iraq that has been generating American casualties in the conflict's opening phase. The decapitation of the Islamic Republic's Central Command did not defund its regional network. It distributed the funding authority to the network's node commanders, who are now operating with financial autonomy that makes them simultaneously harder to target and harder to negotiate with than a centralized command structure would be. Every American airstrike that eliminates a node commander creates a vacancy that another commander, funded from the same distributed war chest, fills within days. The network is not being degraded, it is being stress-tested, and it is passing the test. 2 hours ago, the CIA assessment asked the question that every American official involved in the authorization of Epic Fury needs to be able to answer and currently cannot. Where is the money? Where are the materials? Who has them? And what are they planning to do with them? The operation that was supposed to eliminate the Iranian nuclear threat permanently has instead produced a situation in which the threat's financial fuel has been dispersed into untraceable networks. Its weapons-adjacent materials are partially unaccounted for, and its human expertise is distributed among radical continuity commanders who are funded, operational, and in contact with non-state actors whose interest in nuclear materials is documented and active. Washington does not have answers to those questions today. The CIA assessment does not provide them. It documents the questions with a specificity that makes their urgency unmistakable, and their absence of answers impossible to paper over with victory language. Iran's secret war chest vanished. The nuclear weapons trail leads into darkness. And the administration that authorized the operation that created this situation is now searching, with the CIA's full resources and without public acknowledgment, for materials it cannot confirm are secured in a country it cannot fully enter in a conflict it cannot cleanly end.